Folks, I believe we are live on Facebook, so we call it Facebook Live. Probably don't need me to tell you that this is a major hurricane. If you've been watching hurricanes at all, you know that the more symmetrical they are, the stronger they are. And indeed, the hurricane hunters have been in there, and now winds are up to 140 miles per hour. So sort of some inside baseball, inside the eye. The warmer the eye, the stronger the hurricane, and very often it's an indicator of how much stronger the hurricane can become. Well, just recently, the hurricane hunters, when they're in the eye wall and in the eye, they're flying at about 10,000 feet. That's 700 millibars, and they're finding temperatures of about 70 to 72 degrees. Now, that's normally the temperatures you see at 5,000 feet, 850 millibars in the tropics. So what that basically means is because of the lift within the eye wall, the temperatures that are normally at 5,000 feet have been lifted 5,000 feet. Anyhow, it just continues to basically support what you see. And that's bad news for our friends in the northern Leeward Islands, and then eventually the Virgin Islands of both U.S. and British, and then Puerto Rico. So the northern Leeward Islands on Tuesday night, and Wednesday in toward Puerto Rico, with the eye going right along possibly the north coast. So certainly potentially could hammer San Juan and surrounding areas. And then just north, I'm talking about the eye wall, the hurricane will impact Hispaniola and then in toward Cuba. Now, the Greater Antilles, those are the larger islands, Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, which of course is the Dominican Republic and Haiti and Cuba. It could be, unfortunately for our friends there, that the mountains cause the hurricane to weaken somewhat, or at least won't be quite as intense. So although the forecast is for it to stay as a major hurricane, possibly as a Category 5, occasionally even fluctuating to a Category or a 4, occasionally fluctuating to a 5, it could be the mountains tears it up some. But overall, we expect a major hurricane. Now remember, the cone doesn't show you where the damage is going to be. The cone shows you the variety of the possible positions of the hurricane. And once we get out to the fourth day, average air is 175 miles in either direction. And then to the fifth day, 225 miles in each direction. So it could be in 5 days, the hurricane's all the way down here. Or it could be it's very close to South Florida. Here's a look at just the best computer models. I could show you more. But the older ones really would show you some wild gyrations. It doesn't help us. The best computer model is incredible agreement through the fifth day. And some now showing that turn up through Peninsula Florida. Again, maintaining at least as a major hurricane. Again, those of you new to the hurricane world, major means 3, 4, and 5. And as bad as hurricanes 1 and 2, Category 1 and 2 are, once you get to the major, then you're talking about, unfortunately, like the movies. Now, the European model has been doing best with this hurricane, did best with Joaquin back in 2015, Matthew last year, Harvey. Doesn't always nail it down, but as far as long-term, European model is best. There's the eye, and follow what the computer model does. That would be very dangerous, potentially catastrophic for southeastern Florida, especially the Keys to Miami and Palm Beach. Possibly nearly as intense as Andrew, only hitting a much larger area. And then moving due north, maybe slightly east of due north, that would take the eye wall, remember we're talking about that with Matthew, just offshore from the First Coast. But that's not a done deal. But at least we do see that landfall with this hurricane at this time looks like it's going to be in Cuba and South Florida, and then that would cause it to be de-intensifying. I hesitate to say weakening with this hurricane that is this strong. But that's not the only option, the only possibility. So let's break it down for you. And really all I'm doing is taking us now beyond the 5-day cone. I think there's about a 40% chance it covers very closely what we saw with the European model. Now remember, this is just the eye wall. The overall hurricane will certainly impact us here on the First Coast. Now there's a 30% chance, as I see it, that the hurricane could go farther west before coming back to the northeast. That would be bad news for our friends in the Fort Myers and Tampa area. Although if it took that position, it might not get caught up into a flow that we call it backing, sort of like what Superstorm Sandy did, that if it went farther west, when it came back northeast, it might just keep going northeastward. Notice that just comes up to 70%, and that's because beyond 5 days. There's a reason Hurricane Center only goes to 5 days. They're working on experimentation with the 6th and 7th, but they only go to 5 days because they only see good science that far out. And so that's just me saying, because we're beyond good science, here's what I'm giving as options with 30% chance, because it's 1 week out of, there's just a lot of variables out there. So a reason to tune in. As we talked about last week, there's all kinds of variables, and if you want to talk about it tonight, I'll talk about all those variables, but they really come down to a front that's part of a system. That actually, there's going to be two fronts. Now, this first front should cause the steering currents that have been taking Irma and will for about the next 5 days westward, should cause those steering currents to collapse. So this front will break up the steering currents. In fact, as long as that front is south of us, between us and the hurricane, that will keep the hurricane away from us. That is the eye wall. That's not a done deal yet, but watch that front. Now, the second front, the farther to the south that gets, will define on whether or not Irma gets pulled back again after making the turn. With all of that said, and hopefully you understand there's a lot of variables, if you wonder when the worst weather is going to be, I think later Sunday through early Tuesday. What are the winds going to be? They could be all over the place, but for now I'd say plan on winds maybe for 12, possibly as long as 24 hours, occasionally at 60 miles an hour. To put that in perspective, we issue severe thunderstorm warnings when winds reach 60. So that's why, if this goes as forecast, we would have widespread power outages. Tides, think of it as a storm surge, whether it's the ocean, the estuaries, the intracoastal, the St. Johns River, running about 2 to 5 feet above average. Could be worse, might not be as bad, but that's what I'm looking at the present time. To put that in perspective, the storm surge with Matthew was about 4 to 7. Rainfall total 6 to 12 inches. Now, if this hurricane were moving as slow as Harvey, the winds could be almost as, or the rains could be almost as bad. The reason the rainfall totals, as bad as these will be, don't approach anything like Harvey is because I do think once the hurricane makes the turn, it's going to move north pretty quickly. But again, that's still days away. Tomorrow the sun will be out. As far as gale force winds and even a hurricane watch, I don't expect a hurricane watch for any of us until Saturday, maybe late Friday night. Gale force conditions probably not until Sunday. So long term, what we're really trying to tell you is keep a close watch on the forecast, but the earliest hurricane watch would be Friday or Saturday. So we have plenty of time after Labor Day to get ready. If, in fact, this comes at us after hitting South Florida, it's going to be more of a wind event that we all need to deal with as opposed to more of a storm surge event. But, of course, a wind event for many of us means not just power outages. It means the potential for some big trees possibly coming down on homes. At the present time, that's probably my greatest concern. So that's an overall summary. I tried to be concise. There's a lot to talk about. Do we have any questions for folks?
Some people have plans on Saturday. Should they cancel them in Jacksonville?
I do not see. I guess I should repeat the question. Okay, sorry, I need to repeat the question. So the question has been, for those of you who have plans on Saturday, should you change your plans? I would say, because I don't think the weather's going to be bad, anything besides maybe a developing wet nor'easter, as long as you don't mind that, I don't think let's put it this way, I don't think they'll be dangerous on Saturday. I would say the only reason you might want to change your plans on Saturday is first of all, number one, is if this doesn't go as forecast and it comes at us from the Atlantic Ocean, then there's going to be evacuations going on. But if it goes as forecast, I think as long as you've made your other plans, done what you need to do for the hurricane, I would say keep your plans. Another way to put it would be, I think Sunday and Monday is going to be the time to hunker down.
Should Georgia be concerned of Irma?
Yes. So when I'm talking here, I'm sorry. Question again. Should you folks in Georgia be worried? Yes. When I'm talking here, I'm talking about the whole First Coast family. So that's Northeast Florida and Southeast Georgia. That's from Flagler County through St. John's, Duval, Nassau, and then through Camden and Glenn. But also because this could come right up the peninsula, and because I'm really more concerned about the wind event as opposed to the storm surge event, at least at this time, then I'm talking about you folks in southeastern Georgia, as far to the northwest as Waycross and Alma, as far to the west as Valdosta, and certainly for those of you in Florida, as far to the west as Lake City and Live Oak. Again, here is the 5-day cone of concern. If it's farther to the south, then it's going to take longer to come back our way. Farther to the north, the quicker it'll make that turn. But these are the official numbers. Still emphasizing, unfortunately for our friends in South Florida, along with this forecast, they could receive the worst this hurricane has to offer, and then the hurricane not quite as intense when it makes it here on the First Coast.
So should people in South Florida evacuate?
Well, I'm not going to get... Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry again. So the question is, should people in South Florida evacuate? Certainly, I am not going to be the one to issue that. I don't think South Florida will be put under a hurricane watch. Let's see, if this is going to occur during the day, Saturday into Sunday, I don't think South Florida will be put under a hurricane watch until at the earliest Thursday, and a hurricane warning with evacuations until probably Friday. Now, if I was talking personally to friends and family down there, and I have, so I'll share with you, I think that if on Wednesday, what we're talking about now on Monday is still holding true, why not get ahead of the crowd and go ahead and leave on Wednesday or Thursday? Because it could be that if this goes close to forecast, whether we're talking about the Keys to Miami and Palm Beach, or on the other side from the Keys through Naples and Fort Myers and Tampa, we're talking about a huge population that really only has two ways to get north, basically, up 95 in the Florida Turnpike and or I-75.
So how accurate are the models, would you say?
The models, I'm sorry, here's the question. The question is, how accurate are the models? This probably sounds intuitive, but I'll go ahead and say it anyhow. The closer we are to landfall, the better they do. So, each individual model tends to do better under different scenarios. The European tends to be one of our better, super long range, and what I mean beyond 5 days. Once we get within 5 days, the other global model that's called the GFS does about as well. Once we get short of 5 days, especially into the third day, we have the WRF model, is what we pronounce. It's an acronym for the HWRF. I will tell you that there's what we call consensus models. That is, we average together some of our best models. That's really what the Hurricane Center now does with this particular forecast track. But I'll break it down for you. So 5 days out, the average air now is about 225 miles. That's in either direction. 4 days out, 175. 3 days out, about 125. 2 days out, less than 100. And 24 hours, 50 miles. In fact, the 24-hour forecast for Harvey only missed by 15 miles. Now, for those of you younger than me, or you just haven't been in the hurricane world, this is a tremendous improvement. In fact, it used to be we only had a 3-day cone, and that's because it used to be back in the 80s and 90s that on the third day, the average air was what our average air now is on the 5th day. That's why there's now a 5-day cone. The Hurricane Center is experimenting with the 6th and 7th, and once they're convinced that the 6 and 7 day cone is as good as what our 3-day cone used to be, we'll probably actually have a 7-day cone. But still, as a reminder, and really that question, I think, ties in all the different computer models we're looking at, especially the National Hurricane Center, that again, I just want to make sure that this cone doesn't define where the damage is going to be. I mean, just take a look at the satellite picture. It gets narrower toward the hurricane. There's going to be damage outside where that core is. The cone is simply defining where the eye and the eye wall are going to be. So this is just saying, notice what the error is going to be while we get 5 days out. That's why once we go beyond 5 days, I'm just giving you percentages. Even this, I kind of, it's tough to put out there. It's kind of like being out here without my clothes on, because this is really getting out there on a limb, so to speak, if that makes sense.
So some people want to know about the state of emergency. Can you reiterate with them about why Governor Scott issued that?
Okay, so the governor, and I'm not quoting him, but generally folks want to know, why did the governor issue the state of emergency? And the reason for that, meteorologically, is because, notice, 2 of the options I've talked about here really involve South Florida. So that's now saying 5 days out, 70% chance that this hurricane, which if it maintains its intensity, it would be It would be one of the most significant hurricanes that Florida has seen, not just a hurricane, but one of the most significant hurricanes. And when you consider the population growth of our city, of our state, especially South Florida, the amount of people impacted really in the over 5 to 10 million people. So then what that state of emergency allows is for both the state officials, first responders, and even national folks to really begin to spend money and focus on preparing. So we as individuals don't necessarily have to do anything because of that state of emergency. I personally think it's reassuring to know there's now some taxpayer money going to, as much as we can, get ahead of the hurricane. I should add on that note that starting tonight, the Hurricane Center is doing a couple things. Now, their Gulf 4, the flies way up there, way up at 30,000 feet, kind of does a reverse weather balloon soundings. You know, we have all kind of weather balloons that go up into the upper atmosphere over land. And that's really what put together the computer models. They run through billions and billions of differential equations. We can't send many up over the ocean. And so what happens is the National Hurricane Center on a significant hurricane like this, remember the hurricane hunters are flying down low. It's good low information, but not a lot of that will go into long-range forecasting, whereas the plane that's flying up high will fly around and they'll drop what they call the sondes. And it's kind of like a reverse weather balloon. Instead of the weather balloon going up to 30 to 40,000 feet before it pops, the sonde is dropped from 30,000 feet, gets us the same numbers. But in addition to that, remember the front I talked about? Well, typically, not only in the U.S., but around the world, typically there's only two weather balloon soundings, we call them. They tend to go off around 7 in the morning and around 7 in the evening. Well, starting today, both at 2 in the afternoon and 2 in the morning, there's going to be weather balloon soundings in this area so that we can get a very good idea of what not just the first front, but what the second front is going to do. That is going to be fantastic. You know, a lot of the ifs in forecasting these days is due to lack of data. So the more data we have, I think the better we're going to see those forecasts. With all of that said and all those variables, again, as I wait for another question, these are the numbers and the timing that I'm looking at right now. But I do want to emphasize we will be adjusting this, no doubt about it, day by day. So please make sure you get updates.
So if Irma does go up Florida, will it de-intensify?
Okay, so if Irma does go up Florida, will it de-intensify? It will, and I love the way you say de-intensify, because with a hurricane this strong, even if the numbers go down, you probably won't hear me use the term weak or weakening because it's such an impressive hurricane. The rate of de-intensification will depend on just where the eye wall is. Because, of course, the hurricanes draw off the warm waters, then the closer the eye wall is to either the east or the west coast, the slower it's going to de-intensify. To give you an extreme example, when a hurricane continues to move inland and has no source of warm water, it'll drop about a category every 3 to 6 hours. About a category every 3 to 6 hours. So that if Hurricane Irma hits South Florida, let's say on Sunday morning, then 24 hours later, if it had no warm water to draw from, knock that down at a category 3 to 6 or a category every 3 to 6 hours, and we'd be down to a tropical storm over us by that Monday morning. However, because this hurricane will still be drawing from both the Atlantic and probably the Gulf of Mexico, I think that de-intensification will be slower. I think it's going to be more like about a category every 6 to 9 hours. So if it does take 9 hours, you could see how even if the eye ended up going right over us, we might still be dealing with a category 1 or 2 by the time it made it to the first coast.
Some people say that they're going to be flying in from different parts of the country on Monday. Would they be able to get in okay, or do we expect closures in the airport?
Okay, so folks are wondering if they can fly into Jacksonville, I guess, on Monday. Normally what the airports do is once you get to hurricane warning, even if there aren't hurricane conditions, once you get to hurricane warning, they will shut down. Not necessarily during hurricane watch. So therefore, at this point, I would say plan on the possibility that we will have closures on Monday, but that's not a guarantee. In fact, that's why you notice I don't have hurricane warning here yet. I do think at least some of our counties, let's say St. John's and Flagler, will be put under a hurricane watch, but not sure about a hurricane warning. So I would certainly I would say that there's at least a 30% chance that Jack's Airport will be closed on Monday, but not a guarantee. Certainly airports to the south of us will. Or at least if it goes as forecast, I think we will see at least Miami and Orlando shut down.
How large is the storm?
The hurricane is actually growing in size. So if we're talking about hurricane force winds, it's now about 60 to 70 miles wide. If we're talking about tropical storm force winds, it's now about 250 miles wide. But especially when this pivots, when this hurricane makes it to the Florida Straits, to Cuba, in the Bahamas, South Florida, and it makes that pivot from going west-northwest to north, I think we could see it get much larger. Right about in this point, we could see possibly maybe hurricane force winds cover an area of 100 to 150 miles and maybe tropical storm force winds of 300 to 400.
Are we expecting it to stay a hurricane or a Category 4, and how, like, miles per hour winds, how fast is it?
Okay, so are we expecting it to stay as a Category 4? It is going to have fluctuations. And I think you can see how, even following the cone of concern, if in fact the eye wall goes right over what we call the Greater Antilles, those are the bigger islands, Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, or especially if when it pivots from west to north and takes a while over the mountains of Cuba, we could see it weaken below Category 2. If it doesn't do that, though, if the eye wall stays right over the ocean, and notice the official forecast right now keeps the eye wall just north of the big islands, at the very least, we'll see it stay as a major hurricane. And I think what we'll probably see is it fluctuate from a 4 to a 3 to a 4, maybe occasionally at times a 5. Now, we say that instead of saying all the different numbers, but a Category 5 will be sustained winds of over 155 miles per hour. A Category 4 then is less than that to under 130 miles per hour. And then a Category 3 goes down to 115 below is in a Category 2, and so on.
Okay. Could we just push to the 11 p.m.?
Okay, so thanks everybody. Hopefully that helped. Remember, we are going to be on 11 o'clock. And we will have the latest for you, and we'll also be doing some analysis on the latest computer models. We will, of course, share the cone, but because most of you want to know what's it going to do beyond the cone, we will also share, at least the best that I can, what my forecast is going to be, and also the variables. I think that's a more honest, fair way to do it. So we're going to show you the latest on Irma, because that will come out from the Hurricane Center just before 11. We'll show you the latest cone, and then we'll show you our thinking as well at 11. And we're pretty much going to be doing this through the week, not just if it's bad news, but hopefully occasionally there'll be some good news, and we'll be keeping you updated. So anytime, hopefully it's good for you. You can tune in, check us out on any of the platforms, and we will be sharing our information and analysis, and love it when you share with us as well.